Thank you, everybody, and thanks very much to the Parity team for asking me to do a quick lightning talk. I've got a few slides here, and I'm going to go through them quite quickly. If you've got any questions or it's not clear, you can sort of ask me afterwards. So just before I begin, I'd just like to say that I'm introducing Totem Live Accounting for the first time, actually, and it's basically a global accounting ledger. So just a quick show of hands. How many of you are actually thinking about starting a business or creating a startup, or you're in a startup at the moment as a founder? How many of you here? So a few of you here already. Okay, how many of you already set up your accounting systems? Okay, and I take it you use a kind of off-the-shelf packaged software system to do that, Sage or Xero or something like that. Okay, how many of you are actually qualified accountants? So I knew there was going to be one over there. Thanks, Charles. Okay, so it might come as a bit of a surprise to you, even though you might have set these packages up, that accounting is actually broken. And I'm going to show you exactly why it's broken. The thing is, you probably won't realize it's broken until you're either too busy to do anything about it, or you'll be employing somebody like Charles over there to help you through the difficulties that you're likely to encounter. So basically, you may or may not realize it, but accounting systems just record state changes inside a business. And here we have, on the right-hand side, we have the various kind of components that actually occur to any transaction event that you might have within an accounting system. So you'll have at least two parties to a transaction, possibly more if you include the tax offices. So you'll have an exchange of paperwork. You'll have company A updating their accounts with various postings into debit and credit to entries into their ledgers. There'll be memorandum entries as well. Company B will be doing exactly the same thing, but in a mirrored version of what company A is doing. And then you have the settlement process where you have to match up what you've actually paid through your bank accounts. In this case, we're currently sort of living in that world with what you might have recorded into your accounting system. So all of those parts, you'll notice, are actually completely separate. So they're all broken. That's where it's all broken. So the question is, if we were to reinvent accounting today, knowing what we can do by, with blockchain, essentially allowing two random parties or two or more random parties to exchange information together, what would it look like? So Paul Graham has had a big influence on the startup scene in Silicon Valley. Tweeted recently that discovery is the difference between what's literally obvious and what seems obvious in hindsight. So this is what Totem is about, asking this question and seeing what we can do to solve the problem. So Totem is looking at this in an entirely new way. We're essentially looking at the event of the transaction and looking at the information that can be captured at the point of the event. And what we noticed was that, of course, party A and party B to the transaction usually have entries that mirror each other under specific circumstances. And given that we know how to make a transaction on blockchain, we could extend that functionality to include the information that we might like to include from an accounting perspective. What we might have, if we eventually take this to the nth degree, if you like, is the settlement process using a cryptocurrency would also correct the entries in the accounting book and effectively completely eliminate the problems that you have with reconciliation. So just to give you an example, I guess anybody that's traveled here today will probably already have a handful of these things that you're going to have to encode in your accounting ledgers, and then at some point you're going to have to account for how you paid for those. Usually if it's just a small business, it's relatively easy, but when you get to corporate sizes, this becomes a really difficult task. And even though there's software to actually deal with that, this is quite a heavy burden on the accounting function of any business. So we've already achieved a fair bit already. So the research for this project has evolved over several projects that I've been involved with for about 4 years or so. And when Substrate was talked about at the end of last year, myself and my co-founder realised that this was the way that we could start to build something very quickly to show what we'd had in mind for a very long time indeed. So we built an early proof of concept in December and January of this year. It was just when Substrate was fairly unstable. So although we've got a open source public directory for that, don't, if you look at the code, that's probably the wrong way to do a Substrate implementation. But that was just to get the thing off the ground and to actually start to talk to businesses and find out whether this would be useful to them. So during that process, we've managed to acquire a data sponsor who's a construction firm in the west of England, who's allowed us to look at their detailed accounting records and start to build some scenarios that are relevant for them, but probably will be relevant for lots of people as well. And we've also engaged with an accounting firm in the south of the UK that will help us define that what we're building actually is correct regarding GAAP rules, which is generally accepted accounting practices. So those are sort of quite some significant milestones. But the next steps for us, of course, is to find funding for the project, extend the team. So if anybody wants to get involved, please contact me. We're thinking about how we're going to build and launch the testnet. Obviously, there's processes that we need to go to analyze the data that we've been provided with already, and think about how we're going to encode that information in a more realistic way. And of course, engage with the community to test and use and provide feedback to us. And ultimately, we want to launch a mainnet on this particular project. So this just is a quick idea of what we had always had in mind, actually, and why we felt that Polkadot and the Substrate framework, if you like, was absolutely ideal for what we were planning to do. Here we have, for example, corporate networks where they can run our Totem Substrate parachain inside their own corporate network. We have parachains that exist outside for small and medium enterprises. And then, of course, we'll have the public mainnet for Totem as well. And we're hoping that we will be able to relay the accounting communications across the Polkadot network. So that's pretty much how we saw it. I've got, just before I finish up, I've got 2 last slides, which I don't know if you can see the details on there, but this is the first proof of concepts that we were doing. So essentially, we've got sales ledgers, purchase ledgers, which are normal, the things that you find within software. We have a general ledger with the purchase control accounts and the sales control accounts, as well as individual accounts for whatever it is that we're recording. We've got some tax accounts, and then budget allocation is basically what you would have in your bank accounts. We have got a basic invoice framework there, which will essentially post to any random party that joins the network. And every single wallet, it's intended, would have this entire accounting ledger attached to it. I can go into details of how that would roll up into a large corporation or even a business, but that's some very basic functionality. We have it running at the moment. If anybody wanted to see a demo, I can show it to them afterwards. And this is what it might look like, for example, for multiple companies. It's a bit more detailed than this. I've put general company headings up there, but actually it would be down to the individual within the company would have their own particular ledger associated with whatever activities they do inside that company. So this wouldn't be a globally available ledger for the company as a whole, but it would be actually at the employee level. And that's about it.